Well, the race for the White House heating up, and there's a brand new NBC Wall Street Journal poll that shows Hillary Clinton leading in 4 crucial battleground states. Donald Trump, he trails her: Colorado, Virginia, North Carolina, and Virginia. But Trump did actually show a slight improvement in the Sunshine State. So the big question now is, what does he need to do to turn these polls around? Joining me now, Morgan Ortegas, John Johnson, and Gina Loudon. John, let me go to you first. You're a polling expert. First and foremost, so many people are saying, we look at these Donald Trump rallies and you've got 10,000 people, 15,000 people. You see Hillary Clinton's, gatherings, and it's like, it looks like a high school gymnasium with a couple of folding chairs. How come there's the correlation between what we see isn't reflected in these polls?
Well, what it really hinges on at the end of the day is when you do a poll, you're trying to get a representative sample of voters. So they spend a lot of time thinking about who they sample, who they ask the question of, so it's somewhat balanced like the voting population.
But if they're balanced, why are there always more Democrats than Republicans in these polls?
Well, because the demographics have recently shifted in the U.S. such that there actually are generally more Democrats, and they try to take care of that when they do the polling to weight it. But you always have to look at those percentages when you assess the polls to see. And so there are certain polls that are known to skew Democratic or Republican exactly for that reason, and you have to be careful about that when you interpret them.
You know, Gina, well, before I get to you, you were moving your head here a little bit. Do you agree? You think that's right? Because what we saw in the primaries, Morgan, was a huge swell of people voting on the GOP side.
And the polls had Trump ahead in all of the primaries.
They had him ahead in all the primaries.
August of last year.
And well, here's the thing, though. I'm saying we saw like states like Pennsylvania where a lot of Democrats changed their registration to Republicans. So if we're basing this on 4 years ago, this could be wildly off the mark.
That's a good point. I think to ignore the polls today, if the election were held today, Donald Trump would not win. And to ignore that is to ignore the reality of the polls. Saying that, as you just said, Charles, this is an election like none other. There's still plenty of time for the Trump campaign to turn it around. We still don't know what's going to happen if the 33,000 emails that she deleted will be leaked. We don't know what happens on the debate. So I'm not saying that this is definitive what will happen in November, but I am saying that the Trump campaign needs to have a realistic strategy for how they're going to turn this around in key battleground states, and importantly, not just for him, but for the down ballot, because we can't just win the presidency if we don't keep the Senate. That means that you have no control over Supreme Court justices, over treaties, over these trade deals. So there's a lot at stake here other than just the presidency.
Gina, barring an October surprise like another leaked email saga, would you say at this point, Donald Trump, they raised $80 million, they should start spending it? I just saw a report today. They haven't spent anything in New Hampshire, spent, very little in Pennsylvania, very little in Nevada, nothing in Iowa. These are battleground states where Hillary is either catching up or taking a lead.
Yeah, well, they have said now that they are going to start spending a lot more money, but the polls are starting to stabilize, too. There's an LA Times tracking poll that has them neck and neck. I believe it was Bloomberg and Rasmussen both had them within the margin of error. So these polls are tightening up, and I don't think Donald Trump probably minds running as an underdog outsider. He's kind of run like that most of this campaign and still managed to beat others. So I don't think he necessarily minds that, but I think we also have to bear a couple of things in mind. One is Brexit and that polling and how much that surprised us, and that this race, as many have said, is not like any other race. We really can't base it on what happened 4 years ago, and yet most of the polls are skewed for those numbers. When Gallup, in fact, has Republican-Democrat breakdown at exactly 28% each and independents at 41%. This is key for Mr. Trump because he is definitely tracking higher with independents, I believe about 10 points higher.
Right.
So that's probably good news for him as well. He has to sway those people, but there's still time.
John, should any political party dismiss these polls out of hand?
No, absolutely not. It would be really crazy to do that. Again, it's early. We still have 85 days to election.
Sure, a lot of things can happen. A lot of things will happen.
But you have to be careful, thoughtful about it. But definitely look at the numbers because that really is.
But when someone tells you, look at Brexit, look at some of these missed polls on both sides of the Atlantic over the last couple of years, these pollsters are getting up there with weathermen. I mean, they tell me to bring an umbrella. I never do.
Look, I completely agree that Brexit was a very unique situation with a lot of problems to it. But for these U.S. polls, one of the things you see is things breaking consistently in one direction. That's a sign that something is going on. That's the thing that should concern. Not the 15-point outlier, but the fact that the trend continues in that direction towards Hillary Clinton right now. We'll see what happens.
There were 16 candidates in the Republican primary, Charles, that never believed the polls when Trump was double digits ahead of them. None of them and their campaign staff believed it. I was one of them. them. And now what we're seeing happening in the general is Trump and his campaign staff and his supporters are not believing those polls. And I think it's time really to accept reality, to pivot. Plenty of time. 3 months is a lifetime in politics.
Right.
So I'm not giving him a final judgment, but I am saying we have to be realistic that when Hillary Clinton is double digits ahead in Virginia and Florida and Ohio, this